All right, we are back. Hello there. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. I am Jay Brown, and I'm very happy to be back with you. See, for everyone who was listening last week, that wasn't so hard, was it? Thank you to everybody who sent me emails about the title of the podcast and the music. I agree. I think we're sticking with it. I don't know that we're making any changes. If you want to send more opinions, you can, but it seemed like everybody agreed, and I appreciate that very much. Thanks for checking in again this week, you guys. If you don't know what I'm talking about right now, I'm sorry. Just to know, I like to do a little bit of talking with listeners before we get to the talk. I got a review on iTunes. Another person was unhappy about that. If you're not interested in this part or aspect of the podcast, you could just skip ahead. I will not be offended. But this week, I did want to mention that I have a blog post that's coming out alongside this podcast this week. And I'm kind of putting myself out there a little bit. Frankly, it's about yoga teacher training and hours. And those of you listen to this podcast know it's kind of a theme of mine. I often complain about the fact that we are so trapped by these hours. And what happened was I scheduled my first teacher training since having my yoga center in Brooklyn. So when I had the yoga center in Brooklyn, I did 2 teacher trainings a year. And basically I scheduled like 3-hour workshops. It would be 3 or 4 a month for like 4 to 6 months. And then I was at the center, 5-6 days a week teaching classes, and people come take classes. They would have these workshops with me. We would have discussions. There were then some components that would happen after the scheduled meetings where they had to schedule time to do observe and assisting with me. And it was very individual, and we weren't logging hours. We didn't log the hours. I always felt that at some point we would mutually come to a place where it was obvious that you were teaching and you were good to go. You were off and running. And that's when you were done. And when that happened, those people who got that certificate from me, I believe they did at least 200 hours, but we didn't log all those hours. And a lot of people didn't get to that point. I've said before, maybe 30% of the people who did training with me in Brooklyn actually got that certificate from me. And I think that's right. I think those were the people who were really off and running and teaching. And then the other 70% did it for educational purposes, but when it came down to the actuality of needing to do the work of the teaching, it really wasn't right for them. Maybe it wasn't right for them at that time. I even had people who didn't complete at the time of the training, but showed up in Brooklyn a year and a half later and then completed and became amazing teachers. So you just don't know. And it can't be about hours. And so I scheduled a training with another center hosting me. And of course, it had to be about hours because I don't have the luxury of just 4 to 6 months of whenever I want to use the space. It's not my space. We got to schedule the time, right? And here's the thing. People need to feel like they know what they're paying for. And that's what the hours did for yoga. That's the thing that 200 hours, 300 hours did. It gave everybody a metric so they can feel like they know what they're paying for. And so now we did that. We have the 200 hours. We gave everybody a metric, and it became the business model for yoga centers to meet the growing rents, that's why the classes have gotten shorter and the centers make their money off the trainings. Because we all know what we're paying for, and people will pay thousands of dollars for a teacher training, but they're not so inclined to just come to class every day regularly for 2 years, And you can make the case that now the classes have gotten shorter and they're not so much about education, that going to class every day for 2 years doesn't give you the same kind of education that you used to get. So we've got all these teachers, and there's this meme of, the certificate mills putting out these ill-equipped teachers, and there's just all these teachers. So what's become like sought after is some kind of expertise. Like, who are the wisdom holders now? How do we get to the deeper aspects of practice, which I'm psyched about? You hear me talk about it all the time, that there's this move in that direction. I was talking about that last week. But here's the irony, is like the wisdom holders, the people who are alive and here to teach us about yoga, none of them came to that expertise by way of yoga teacher training as we've come to define them. They all came to what they came to through undetermined periods of time with unstructured self-inquiry and, life occurrences and intuitive decisions. See, that's the thing. It's a lot about intuition. And people who are really equipped as yoga teachers know that the training that they do and the study they do, and usually it involves quite a bit because we're passionate about yoga, right? So you study, right? And all that study that you do, it informs some intuitive thing that is actually the doorway to the magic that makes yoga work. But we're real nervous about that. We're real nervous on placing any kind of value on intuition. One, because you can't measure it. Two, because there's like this gray area between intuition and magical thinking. And then there's been all this adverse effects from the crumbling authority figures, right? So we can't say trust your intuition, because what does that mean, actually? But the reality is, that's the paradox, that it's an intuition that gives you the self-empowerment to have yogic understanding, which is what puts you in a position to teach it. So I feel like there's this conversation that's supposed to be happening. The Yoga Alliance is announced that they're going to review the standards after 17 years. And my fear is just that we can't see beyond the hours regime. Like, we're just going to add hours, more tiers. There's going to be 200, 300, 500, 750, 1500. We're just going to make more tiers of hours. Or we're going to tinker around with what's in the 200 hours and add trauma sensitivity or whatever we're going to do. And it's not that I'm against that. It's just that the issue is that there's a dishonesty to it. There's a dishonesty to the idea that the Yoga Alliance is providing the standards and enforcing them or a legitimizing body. Maybe the Yoga Alliance should get out of the business of hours, Like, we can still have it. Like, here's the thing. It's about language a lot of times, I think. We could still have schools and teachers have a registry, and there could still be a value to that. But the 200 hours needs to be presented in a way where they're just guidelines that people utilize in whatever the way they want to utilize it. And we shouldn't have it be this idea that you're paying for hours. That is the problem. That's the sham of it. And when I have these conversations and we try to imagine it, it's like we can't. We're sort of stuck. We're stuck in this, well, how will we do it? How could we possibly pay for it? Well, we could imagine it a different way. We could actually continue to do the trainings that we've been doing them, but just stop making it about the hours. Let's make it about competency. Let's find ways to encourage smart yoga and training. So I don't know. I don't know where it'll go, this whole conversation. But I know that if we just continue to kind of put our heads in the sand and hope for the best. It's not, it's not going to lead to a new and better place for yoga teacher training. And it's not that there isn't good stuff happening. Again, don't get me wrong. I still think that yoga teachers are out there doing really good work and, working within the confines of the hours. But the reality is, everybody who's done it knows you schedule a 9 to 5 day, so you get your 8 hours. You're supposed to be like what? Some kind of like half-hour lunch break in between there or something. The reality is like max, maybe you're getting 6 hours of actual study. And even at that, that's any more than that's kind of crazy. Like 3 hours and a break and then 3 hours. Okay, I can see that as like an intensive day. But like stacking on more hours is it's often just filler time. Maybe it's more discussion time, which is perhaps of value, but I don't know. You guys know what I'm talking about. Those of you who've done teacher trainings, especially those of you who conducted them, yoga center owners, y'all know what I'm talking about. There's a subtle sham to this hours regime. And I just want to suggest that we would entertain the possibility that we could do something different. It doesn't necessarily mean anti-yoga alliance. It just means being more honest. Can we find a way to be more honest about the trainings that we're offering? I would like that. So that's my little bone to pick today. I want to also send a little love to all of my new friends at Easton Yoga and Yukato Yoga here in the Lehigh Valley. I attended 2 events. Both of the centers had like organized events. One was like more just for teachers and staff, but one was like a birthday party. And it's really, really lovely. I'm so humbled and impressed, and just like the authenticity and the warmth, and to just feel the wonder of a beautiful yoga community and have people who are wonderful people around to practice yoga with is awesome. And so thank you to all my new friends if you happen to be listening. And it goes to what today's talk is about with Lucas Rockwood in many regards. One of the things that Lucas talked about was different tier markets, first tier, second tier, third tier markets for yoga. And he was talking about what's possible on what tier. And it just seems like the kind of yoga practice that I want to do is happening in places like Easton and Bethlehem and what he was calling third tier markets, which I don't take to be a derogatory thing. In fact, it's a positive. So anyways, it's been great to be around wonderful people here in the Lehigh Valley. Thank you very much. And today, as I just mentioned, I am talking to Lucas Rockwood. Other than talking about like models for yoga centers and different markets for yoga centers, the whole reason why Lucas is on the podcast today is I read this article he wrote about doTerra. He has very strong feelings about doTerra being a manipulative scam, and I think he makes some very strong points. As I mentioned last week, there may be some of you listening who are doTerra reps, and so I'm just giving you a heads up that that is the sort of angle that he takes, and I'm open for anybody to respond. So we will listen to this talk with Lucas today. I want to also mention next week, Sadie Nardini is coming on. We're going to talk some inside scoop on the reality TV show Yoga Girls, but also we go into a wide range of stuff, and it is a fun talk, and it will be next week. What else? Let me drop my stuff. I am going to be in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia at Dragonfly Yoga on January 6th. I am going to be at Tri Yoga Camden in London, January 12th through 14th. And I am going to be at Triangle Yoga in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, February 16th through 18th. You can find out about those gigs along with the archives of this podcast and that blog post I was mentioning and my online yoga video offerings. If you want to take class with me here in the Lehigh Valley, even if you don't live here in the Lehigh Valley, you can do that by subscribing to my live stream. All of that stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Please support this podcast if you're enjoying it. If you've never gone to a blogger podcast page and made a direct donation, you've got a little bit of dispensable income at your hands, that would be great if you did that. You could also just go to iTunes and write us a review or give us some stars. The last one I got was not a positive review. It would be nice if someone went up there and put a positive one. That would be cool. Or, again, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't beg for positive reviews. Write whatever you want to write. Give us whatever you want. Any kind of interaction, engagement, hopefully support would be greatly appreciated. Okay. What else? I think that's it. Let's go ahead and get to this talk today with Lucas Rockwood.
Hey there, it's Lucas here.
Hey, Lucas, it's Jay. How's it going, man?
Great, nice to speak with you.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. Did I get you at an okay moment? You're all settled in and ready to talk?
Good to go, let's do it.
Cool, man. Well, it's super fun to get a chance to speak with you. We don't know each other at all. And I know you because 2 years ago when I started this podcast, I did a Google search for, yoga podcasts. And yours was the only one that came up that wasn't like practices, but more like talk.
Sure.
And so I was like, oh crap, somebody is already doing it. And then I listened, but yours was covering a whole bunch of range of topics that are out of my wheelhouse. You're really into nutrition and supplements and a whole bunch of stuff that I wasn't into. And I was like, oh, okay, it's cool. I could do my thing still. And then I whenever I check to see that my podcast episode is up on my iTunes feed, sometimes at the bottom it says other people are listening to these podcasts. Your face is often down there. So I feel like I know you for those reasons. And then recently I read this article that you wrote about doTerra. And that's just something I've been really interested because I don't know anything about it, but I've always had a little bit of a not great feeling about it. And you explained why. So that was my initial inspiration to invite you to come on today. And I really appreciate you giving me your time. So thanks for that, man.
Sure, yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. And then just now, earlier today, frankly, I was I have this new rule, you got to do a little research before you talk to somebody, So I was checking you out online and we have a bunch of things in common. First of all, I noticed it said that you grew up in Southern California. Is that right?
Yeah, I've kind of lost my home, but I was born in Minneapolis, and I was a teenager in Southern California, so that always kind of feels like home, but I don't have any connections or any family there, and I've been abroad now for 15 years, so most of my adult life, so kind of homeless, but because I was a teenager in Southern California, it kind of feels like home.
Well, what part in Southern California were you in?
Well, I'm in 91. I guess my family moved to Orange County, so I was there for a couple of years, Laguna Niguel, and then I was in Ventura County for quite a bit, in Ojai. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ojai, which is up near Santa Barbara.
Sure.
Lived in Berkeley shortly, but floated around in some other funny places. It was in Bakersfield for a little while, Tehachapi, a funky mountain town in the Mojave.
Okay, well, it's interesting because I grew up there in the San Fernando Valley and then left in 1990. So I left right when you got there, it sounds like.
Exactly.
We passed each other. Yeah. And then I also read, though, that you ended up going to New York. Is that right?
Yeah, so I actually lived longer in New York than I lived in California. I was in New York from 97 to 2003, right before I left the U.S. And I think you live in Brooklyn, is that right?
I did. I just moved a few months ago to Pennsylvania, but I was in Manhattan from 95 until 2010. Okay. So we were there at the same time. So you were there too. What were you doing in New York?
What was I doing? I guess I was there, I got in New York in 1999 and dropped out of university. There's a longer story there, which it's not an exciting story, but I dropped out of university and it was a great time to be in.
Did you go to New York to go to school?
No, I went to New York chasing a girl. And,
okay.
And family went bankrupt, had to drop out of school. I accidentally got really into university. I was doing really well in it. And family went bankrupt, had to drop out of school and entered the workforce at like age 20, age 20, something like that. So it was like 1999. And economy was roaring. So I did great. I was making great money. I had an office job. I was working at Lower Broadway. I was working in publishing and just kind of started life really early. So I was doing that in New York and just hanging out. And then I discovered yoga in New York once I got kind of in a bad place health-wise. Discovered yoga in New York, started off at Bikram Yoga Soho, which doesn't exist anymore, and then I was at Eddie Stern's Shala for about a year before I left. That's kind of where my whole yoga journey started, but it's been a long time.
Well, I hear that. I recorded a podcast from Eddie's new Shala, which is in a different place than when you went to. Was your place, was it on the Broome Street location? Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's strange how many parallels there are. Like I was in school, my dad went bankrupt, I graduated out of school, no financial help. So the same as you, like age 21, 1995 in New York. But I got a cheap apartment in the East Village, like $600 a month. I didn't have to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
It was like possible. You could do it.
What? It's always possible. I mean, I moved to New York. My first apartment, it was like a Bing John Malkovich apartment. It was like literally half size. Like I couldn't stand up in my room, and it was in Hell's Kitchen. I paid $500 a month. When I left in 2003, I had a 950 square foot railroad apartment in Williamsburg that I paid $950 for. So I mean, it's all possible. You just have to be.
Look, I had a yoga center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, for the last 10 years, and I just sold it 2 months ago. I lived there for longer than that, and I just moved 2 months ago. And I'm just here to tell you, it ain't like it was in 2003. It just it caught up. Like the rents caught up. It's a different place. But I know you were in New York, and then you left. And I read somewhere that it happened, like, you were involved in, like, running restaurants, isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
And I read somewhere that it happened after a seizure that you had.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what you're talking about with your health issues?
Yeah. So I was working in publishing in New York City, and I was in my really early 20s, and I just started drinking a lot, and I started using a lot of pills, and I was just drunk or high pretty much all the time, which is not that unusual when you're 20 years old, but I was trying to do like a normal life. Like I was trying to be a man, like be an adult, and I got in a bad place, and like everything, I just tend towards extremes. So I just took things too far. And Christmas 2001, right after September 11th, which was a big deal for me, I really bottomed out. And so just after September 11th, I was visiting my parents back. They were still living in Southern California, so I was visiting them. And I just decided, like, I guess I was just too embarrassed to be totally screwed up around them. So I was still drinking heavily, but I stopped taking pills and I stopped doing a bunch of stuff. And long story short is I had a grand mal seizure in front of my parents. We were out for like a Christmas jog or something, and I woke up in the back of an ambulance, both my parents terrified. And
what do you think that happened? Just where you...
I was taking a bunch of things. The thing that probably did it is I was really into, so for people who know Breaking Bad, like they're really into like pseudoephedrine, which is like, they go in the early episodes of Breaking Bad.
Speed, right? Trucker speed.
Yeah, exactly. So you get pseudoephedrine, you can make like real speed from it. Well, back in those days, pseudoephedrine you could buy in GNC. And so I was really hooked on pseudoephedrine. I would take a lot of that. And I would also drink a lot. And I was also hugely into coffee. I worked in coffee shops too when I was younger. And people say, oh yeah, I'm into coffee too. It's like the hipster thing. I was like, no. I was into coffee. like
it can
I was
be kind of a
caffeine.
religion. Coffee. I know some people who are deep into it, and it could be. Yeah. It's a deep rabbit hole.
It's just different when you have a personality like mine. Like I would take pills, so you take caffeine with ephedrine. It's a stack, right? It's a really common stack. It's illegal now, but I used to take a lot of that. But then I'd be so wound up that I'd take GHB, which is also known as the date rape drug, very, very wonderful name, or I'd take Klonopin, which is a tranquilizer. And so I just had like a pretty nasty cocktail, and I pulled it off. Like even people listening to this have never heard this story, they probably wouldn't even believe it, but that was my routine. I'd take pseudoephedrine all day long, drink myself silly every night, and then if I couldn't fall asleep, I'd take Klonopin or GHB to knock myself out, and I just kind of rinse and repeat. And I did that for a long time, and so I was just in a really bad place.
Well, I'm curious, like, whenever I've taken pseudoephedrine, it's really tweaky. Like, did you like the feeling of that? Like, what was it? Why were you taking that pseudoephedrine during the day? Like, what was it addressing for you, or what? Like, it just giving you more energy, or what was your mind about it at the time?
I always say that I like everything bad for me, and I haven't found anything bad for me that I didn't like. I like it all. Every drug I've tried, food doesn't work for me. Like, I know some people can just go like eat away their sorrows or something. It doesn't work for me. Like, I'll just stop eating. But like drugs and alcohol, they just work. Like, they just light up my brain in a way that I like. I like speedy stuff. I like that. I like it all. I really enjoy it.
I see. And that was the easiest to get, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I was just really practical. I'm just a really practical, organized person. And, I would go, there was some liquor store on Lafayette that I would go, and every week I'd get a handle of vodka and a handle of Cutty Start whiskey. And then I'd pop by the GNC and I'd pick up like a couple bottles of pills. And the GHB I ordered from some dodgy place online that pretended it was paint thinner. And the Klonopin I got from a friend who had a doctor who'd give him whatever he wanted. And off I went. I don't really know. I'm just like not a junkie. Like, people listening are just like, that is the fake story. But it's like, this is legit. This is how I operate. Like, I just have this weird, pragmatic, totally eyes wide open. I'm just like, I'm doing this, and that's what I did. I don't know.
And were you going to yoga classes while you were all in all this stuff?
No. So I had this grand mal seizure December 2001, right after September 11th. And I just had this wake up call, and I was like, everything in my life is not right. And my job seemed funny. I was living in the Lower East Side at the time, and I was working on Lower Broadway at the time. And everything just seemed funny. The colors change. You look at the world, and this big black cloud hovering over Manhattan, and it just feels like apocalypse now kind of thing. And
it came in on you. The whole thing came in on you.
Yeah.
And what happened? Yeah. I'm sorry, with your parents when they woke up, like, did they freak out? Did they?
Yeah, they did. They did freak out. They were really kind. I've never told them the whole story. I don't know if they've found it or not, because I've recently started sharing it. I never really talked about it to anyone, really. Actually, never told friends or anything. Most of my drug and alcohol abuse has and was always secretive. I never told anybody. It was never. People always say, like, I'm a social drinker. I was like, anything I do socially, I've done like 1,000 times private. Like, I'm just not that kind of person. So I never really told them the story. They definitely freaked out, but they're just great people, and they just kind of supported me, and in a way where they just kind of gave me my space. And I'm also very responsible. Like, I don't get into trouble. I managed to never get arrested, despite a million close calls. But I'm just really responsible. I mean, I was holding a pretty respectable job. I was traveling to conferences. I was really keeping it all together. But
you were functional.
Totally, highly functional. I was making I was making more money than anybody I knew. I was doing well. I was really doing pretty well until I wasn't. And then I really wasn't. Yeah. And I just decided I needed to get healthy, and I just needed different friends, and I needed a different social circle. And then I met a girl, and this girl was into yoga. She dragged me to my first yoga class, and she was like a vegan, and she had all these tattoos and piercings, and I don't know. I was into her. And so I went to class, and I was just like this big white whale. Like, I was just like bloated. Hot yoga, so you take off your shirt, and I'm looking at myself, and I'm all bloated and white and can't move, and I'm passing out. And it's just my
that's kind of a pretty intense yoga class to stumble into.
Yeah. And it was yoga's really tamed down quite a bit these days, but back then, like Manhattan, New York City,
it was hardcore. I totally know what you're saying. We talk about that on the podcast a lot, because I came into New York at that time, and when people come on and they were there, it was like a scene, and there was like the Bikram classes where I remember going to Bikram class, and I remember the teacher, like, kind of in a very militaristic way, sort of announcing to us that you might throw up, and that's okay. And it was like really intense. I mean, it was way more hardcore than these days, I think.
Yeah, and Eddie's studio, he's so mean. Like, everybody was just like so serious. I was like,
well,
wow.
It's funny you bring that up, because when I talked with Eddie, we talked about that specifically, and he said to me that things have changed. That even in Ashtanga, they don't do the same thing where, like, in the past, if you couldn't do stuff, they'd send you to the back of the room, or you can't modify stuff or change stuff. You can rest, and they're not doing the same hard assists that they used to do. Like, he said that even they have softened. They've had to over the years. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So you go slam into it and you keep going.
Yeah, so I went and I just became this like Bikram fanatic. I think I did 385 days of Bikram in a row. When I couldn't get to a studio, I had this. I mean, this is back in the day. I had a cassette tape of Bikram, and if you think Bikram's bad in person, like don't listen to his cassette tape. But that's how hardcore I was, and I just did it. I just went for it, and never really fit in. I've never really fit in anywhere, but I never really fit in with that whole Bikram world. But it was hardcore enough and it felt enough that I just went with it. And so I got clean really fast. I mean, in my first Bikram class, I remember getting out of the class and I was smoking on the street. So I mean, it was still like it was a sort of soft landing. I didn't get into it straight away, but very quickly I progressed from hot yoga world into the Ashtanga world, and I fit a little bit better in that scene. Never really fit in that scene, but still I like the crazy hardcore. Quiet, nobody talks. It's very masculine.
It's self-practice too. Like once you learn it, you just go in and do it with yourself. So that might make sense, right?
Yeah. And it's very addictive personality. I mean, you see so many type A sort of overachievers get just totally.
It was that for me too, because, it has like the 6 series and no one ever really gets to the end. And it was like, you felt like you had a ladder to climb,
Exactly.
All right. So you're doing hot yoga religiously and you're still in New York?
Yeah. So I'm in New York, and I everything changes. So I lost a ton of weight. Like I lost 41 pounds in 6 weeks or something like that. I started. I went to this meditation retreat. So I did I got really into like Goenka Vipassana. So I did a Vipassana thing. Became a vegetarian. Then became a raw foodist. So I just lost all this weight, and literally my clothes didn't fit me. Like not people say that, but like my clothes did not fit. Like I look like a fool, and and people didn't recognize me. I remember I actually crossed my boss on the street down on Prince Street, and she didn't recognize me at all. And so it was a really big deal. So I ended up quitting my job and just got really into food. So I started teaching raw food nutrition, doing raw food classes, both in LA. And then I tried to move back to California. It didn't really work out. So I ended up back in New York, and I was working at Caravan of Dreams, which is still in existence.
Oh my gosh. I ate there religiously because I was like a yoga guy, vegetarian. And that was like the restaurant. You could go get the really good veggie burgers and stuff there. And they had like those bowls, and there was that other raw food place for a while in the East Village I went to, so I can't remember it.
Quintessence was there for a long time.
That's the one. Exactly. See, they were into that scene, huh?
I was in it. I was deep into it.
All right.
So I had classes, just went kind of crazy, and so I started managing Caravan of Dreams. Again, just everything in my life is pretty much based on obsession. So I just got really, really obsessed, and I started managing the restaurant. So I was there all the time, and had 23 staff or something. I was 24 years old.
Oh, that was the restaurant that you managed, Caravan of Dreams?
Yep. Still operating, and the owner, Angel, he was just here. Actually, I just saw him a couple months ago. He's still running like crazy. They're still going. So yeah,
that's amazing. I mean, I walked by that so many times. That's crazy. Wow. Okay, so now I know exactly where you were.
Yeah, you can piece together my life. It's very public.
No, I can't. I can't piece together your life. That's too far. But I can. I have a visual picture, and I know that restaurant and the vibe of that restaurant because I spent a lot of time in there. So I feel like, oh, okay, that's what you were doing, and you were definitely managing it when I was eating there.
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Very cool. We like those movies where people pass in time and stuff. All right, so tell me what happens because I know you leave New York, and why does that happen, and when does that happen?
Yeah, so I'm running this restaurant, and I guess I always thought of myself as like an academic, and then when I had to quit school, I just had to rethink everything. So I had like some weird stints in theater. I had some like weird I was doing stand-up comedy. I was doing all kinds of weird stuff, and I just couldn't really find my feet. And I was in the restaurant business because I was really into nutrition and getting healthy, but I was like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. Is not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not supposed to be chopping veggies, and it's just not me. I love it, but it's not me. So I decided I would come home from this. This is my story. I had this railroad apartment in Williamsburg, and I would come home and I would take sort of mafia style. I would take like broccoli rubber bands and wad up cash, and I would throw it on the top of my cupboard. My girlfriend put her cash in the freezer, and I put mine on top of the cupboard. And that was our routine. We just come home and throw cash. I'd throw mine above the cupboard. She'd throw hers in her freezer.
And that was like from tips. Like, what was the cash coming from?
I don't know, it's restaurant business, so everything's cash, and I get paid in cash. The restaurant would have troubles; they couldn't pay taxes, and then you get tips. And so anyway, at the end of the year, I had $12,000, and she had $3,000 or something like that, and in cash, in 20s and 5s and 1s and stuff.
Crazy. And, that's crazy. That's crazy. You got $12,000 in cash above your dresser. Somebody break in and take that, man.
It's crazy, except that I could tell you that repeated story all through my adult life, so it's not uncommon in my story. But.
All right, so you got $15,000 between you.
Yep. And so we decided we're going to take a sabbatical and we're going to go to Thailand because I'd met some crazy raw foodists who said Thailand was the place to be for raw foodists. And so I helped my girlfriend get a job at a studio called Bikram Yoga Bangkok. And we were on a payphone in Williamsburg right next to the train station, and we're calling Bangkok with a calling card. I mean, it's a really pivotal moment.
Now,
but she got the job. We moved to Bangkok, and that's kind of when things started.
Well, were you teaching yoga yet?
No, so I was still really new to yoga. I was probably practicing for a year, but I was 10 times the fanatic she was, just because of my personality. I mean, she's I was just way more into it.
And did the people at Bikram Yoga Bangkok speak English?
Yeah. So back then, you couldn't get a yoga teacher in Asia. So when one thing in life is I've been really good with timing. I don't know how. I'm completely disconnected from everything, but somehow I'm good with timing. So I got to Asia just at the right time. Second yoga studio in Bangkok, and the other studio was in Pat Pong, which is where there's the ping pong show. It's not a good neighborhood to be. And so they spoke English, and all the teachers, there was a Canadian guy there, and there was another American woman there. And it was just on from the moment we got there. So her classes were packed. I started teaching vinyasa classes within a few months I had no training or anything. I just started teaching.
My classes were packed. You've just been practicing a lot, right?
Yeah, and again, it's just when you're really passionate about something, you just think of it. It's just people can smell it on you. They just want to be around you. And so that was my raw food thing. The same thing. I didn't even know what the hell I was talking about back then, but I was just mangoes, people would yes, let's go to your workshop. And so in Bangkok, same deal, just these sweaty, it's so hot in Bangkok anyway, and I was teaching these classes, the mirrors were dripping with sweat, and people never done yoga before. So classes were packed right away, and it was just a good time. And so from there, then I started doing a lot of training, and I got a little bit more serious about it. And but things really took off there. And really, when I look at all the different things that have happened in my life, it's really timing is such a big deal. And I've always done it on accident. It's something that I've just been really fortunate with. And I have no idea because I'm not even connected. I don't even read the news or anything, so I don't know how I know anything. But somehow I've been really fortunate with time and place. Well,
it's interesting to me that you left New York when you did, because I stayed. You left.
Right.
And then to be an American abroad. And I've traveled to different places in my life, and it is a very different feeling. I never even thought of myself as an American until I left. And when you're in India with your blue passport, and all this money strapped to your waist, it's you start to get a really different feeling. So was that a big, I don't know, what the decision to stay there is what I'm interested in. You didn't feel like you had to come back to America?
I did. Yeah, I did. And I tried. But all in 14 years, I've spent a total of 3 months. If you add up all the weeks and everything. So I really haven't been back at all. It just hasn't worked for me. But there's different phases that you go through as an expatriate. There's people who write books about it and stuff like that. But there's different phases. Some people integrate, some people segregate. This is why, in any city, you can find groups of people from all over the world living totally that same life in that city. People react totally differently, and so I become more American every year that I'm gone. But of course, I'm not. My references are totally off. I use a lot of British words because people speak more British English here than American. Yeah. And but I still feel like my identity is hardcore American every day, even though it's not. It's totally.
But that's how you grew up. That's still who you are, even though you've been gone for a while.
Well, you get stigmatized. You push back, So when you're the minority, when you're the foreigner, when you talk funny, when you look different, and that's been my reality for my entire adult life. At some point you just start to own it, and you just. And some people don't, but I really do. This is who I am, and so it's been an interesting transition. But I guess right around year I think for me it was around year 5 or something. I just kind of made peace with the fact that maybe I was just going to live a different kind of life. And now I've got a couple of kids, and my kids are culturally confused. My little boy speaks more Catalan than he speaks English. So, I mean, it all gets very complex very quickly.
Well, very interesting. Well, we haven't gotten to Barcelona yet. I think first I'm interested because you said you start teaching and you have all this experience and passion for food now too. And then I read somewhere that you had like an article that went kind of viral, like 1 million views or something, and you like made a bunch of money. What was that about? Is that right? Did I read that right?
I certainly have. Yeah, that was much more recent. That was probably 5 years ago. That was much more recent. That's kind of a big tangent, but
okay. I just saw that, and I think what I'm trying to get to is that like what I know of you, and you keep saying like you're so removed, but you're still American. But I still feel like you've done some things online that are interesting to me. That that's talked about in the yoga world a lot. Like these other revenue streams. So I'm sort of getting at like when does the internet hit for you? You know what I mean? Basically.
Yeah, I'll give you like the abridged version. So I'm in Bangkok and I'm teaching probably 15 classes a week. And again, like my timing, I don't know why, but the timing is good. And so then I guess also I just want to go to the best place. And so Hong Kong was the best place in Asia because Pure Yoga had just opened up. So I managed to get a job there, which took a little doing. I got my girlfriend a job, and then I got a job later because I just wasn't very qualified or experienced. But then I was at Pure Yoga, which was just crazy. We had 10,000 members, which now they probably have 100,000, but we had 10,000 members back in 2005, and 6 studios overlooking the harbor. And so I'd go from one studio to another. So again, huge classes, just racked up tons of experience really quickly. And again, I just kind of got that feeling like I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do for 10 years. And so I put together this business proposal, which is just hilarious. But I called it Pure Paradise, because I was working at Pure Yoga. So I called it Pure Paradise. I put together this business proposal, and I go to this guy I'm working with, and I just say, hey, can we close the door? I got to show you something. And I show him this business proposal. I was like, let's open this retreat center together. And, he just tries to hold a straight face, and he's like, I don't know about that. I don't know about, anyway, fast forward 6 months later, I'm living on Koh Samui Island in Thailand, and I have like a totally abridged version of my retreat center, but like it's up, man. It's up. I have a restaurant. I have a yoga studio. I started doing my teacher trainings, the whole deal. Like I did it, and this same guy comes to visit me, and he's like, why didn't you approach me with this idea? I was like, I did, man. I sat you down and I showed it to you. You just thought I was a fool. And so that's how it happened. I moved back to Thailand. Same girlfriend, we opened this business together. The business blew up the relationship pretty quickly, but that's how I got started. So then I'm running a yoga studio. Again, I got that same feeling.
So wait a second. Let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what I see is like you're there, you're American, you're in Asia. You see that, and I know this to be true still to some degree, probably less, because I do some international travel myself, that there's some pretty like, for lack of other words, like ripe markets for yoga places.
Sure.
And so how are you able to do, like, was it just like low overhead in Thailand? Like, so you just managed to like put that all together out of nowhere, having never done it before?
Somebody was just asking me, I just finished a training course here last week, and we were at dinner, and somebody just asked me, how'd you get the money? I was like, I didn't have any money. But again, I had a little bit, and a little bit is is surprisingly effective. And so I had the same thing, like maybe around 10 grand or 12 grand from teaching yoga in Hong Kong. I just did nothing. I like went to yoga, ate rice, and like, saved money.
Yeah.
And so I had like 10 grand or something like that, which it's not much. It's not enough.
Well, but you know what? It's funny you use that number. I started my yoga center with a 15 grand SBA loan.
Yeah, there you
Community
go.
Express, 15 grand. That's all I needed. I had a little bit, but I needed I needed more, and that was it. That was enough to make it happen.
Yeah. And so it's also just how many yoga teachers do you know who have 10 or 15 grand? None. They don't have anything. And so they have no leverage, right? They come to you with these ideas, and it's just like, oh, you want me to put up a bunch of money? Well, what do you have? So again, I put together that same business proposal. I pitched my old friends back in Bangkok who had been really good to me, who I'd walked out on really good terms, but I'd left them and said, hey, I got to go pursue this thing. And they didn't like that I left. They didn't like that I was doing really well. They wanted me to come back and work with them. And so I put together this the same business.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.